Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
May the king live forever. If you stand up in your living room next Saturday at 11 a.m. and chant that mantra, are you patriotic or are you idiotic? We'll be discussing that this evening on the Open University of the Airwaves, the mother of all talk shows. And on this day in 1945, the banner of victory was hoisted over the battered Reichstag and the bunker of Nazi fascism, where it lay in the rubble, dead. But dead forever is a question that remains open. And on this day in 1975, possibly the greatest day of my life, the Vietnamese people liberated Saigon from half a century of battle against French colonialism and then United States colonialism. And Burke and Hare, the new Burke and Hare, who they, you may be asking? They were the grave robbers. The police in Scotland are now investigating the use of money left in dead people's wills for the cause of independence that allegedly were frittered away on luxuries like, I don't know, £110,000 motorhomes to sit in the driveway of the old mother of the then chief executive of the SNP, Mr. Nicola Sturgeon. All that and much, much more is coming up in the course of the show over the next 2 hours or so. So fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night, as Betty Davis once said. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Vote now on our poll. If you stand up in your living room and swear allegiance to the king, are you A, patriotic, or B, idiotic? You can vote on my Twitter, on YouTube, on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, or on the YouTube community poll. I want a big number on this poll, which is my intention and why I'm mentioning it right up top in the show. Apparently, we're supposed to chant in our own homes in an act of state worship, "May the King live forever." Well, I will not be doing that for a number of reasons. Secondly, I will not be watching the coronation and therefore will have no idea when I would be supposed to chant it. Secondly, it is an idea absolutely unholy. May nobody live forever. Living forever is an ungodly plea, an ungodly ambition. Everyone must live and everyone must die, including Prince Charles. And thirdly, although I could go on, believe me, I have no allegiance to the man that will be crowned king. A golden hat put on his head at a cost of £250 million in austerity-racked Britain. A man not fit to wear the crown. And that's a view held by many people. I shall go through them. But the main point is that even if he was a paragon of virtue, even if he was an Olympian model of beauty and grace and intellect, I would still regard the idea of crowning someone king of all his subjects, because that's what we are, not citizens, on the basis, accidental basis, of birth, when in fact, if Princess Anne, a much more suitable candidate for the crown if we are to have one, would not have been crowned even if she had been born before Prince Charles, on the grounds of primogeniture. The male in the line comes first. I think the idea of monarchy is an infantilizing idea. I know that many of my viewers do not agree. Many of them look across the Atlantic at the banana republic presided over by Joe Biden and say, no thanks. But that's a false dichotomy. We have no need to reject monarchy and go for an executive presidency. We have no need to go for a political presidency of any kind. We can have an entirely titular, representative head of state, but one chosen by us, not even necessarily directly, chosen by the parliament and the regional assemblies, chosen by the local authorities, chosen by a panel of 1,000 citizens. Any kind of election would be fine by me. But the idea that just for an accident, Prince Andrew, bosom buddy of Jeffrey Epstein, and under some surprising bosom buddies of Jeffrey Epstein emerging on social media, at least today, Noam Chomsky, anyone? He says it's none of our business that he was a bosom buddy of Jeffrey Epstein. I think it's in the public interest that we should know this myself. But I digress. The point is, this accident of birth system could easily have given us Prince Andrew as king next Saturday. Arise, King Andrew. Oops, he's already arisen, but at least he's not sweating. The whole idea is entirely ridiculous. But for overseas viewers in particular, let me summarize why it is likely that the man being crowned at the cost of £250 million next Saturday will be the last, will bring the increasingly discredited idea of monarchy in Britain crashing to a halt. There's a critical mass of people who don't want him, who don't feel any allegiance to him, and who would regard, therefore, any such pledge as being entirely hypocritical. The smallest number would be people like me, who are against monarchy in principle. But add to them the new constituencies of which I speak. First of all, this man conducted a decades-long adulterous affair with an adulterous woman who's invited her husband, who was cuckolded by Charles, to the crowning of King Charles. How's that for a crowning glory? Camilla Parker Bowles is now our queen, in defiance of assurances given repeatedly to the British Parliament when I was sitting there watching and listening to what was being said. She'll never be the queen, they said. She'll be the queen consort. Well, she was for a few months, but now from Saturday, she's the queen. She ain't no queen, bruv. She cheated on her husband for decades, and Charles cheated on his wife for decades. But although Mr. Parker Bowles has survived, maybe even relieved, to be shot of her, no such luck accompanied Princess Diana. She was driven mad by this adulterous affair. She tried to commit suicide. It destroyed her. And she was killed in remarkable circumstances. I believe indirectly related to the way that Prince Charles, as he then was, treated her. So everybody in Britain that loved Diana, and believe me, that was many more millions than ever loved Charles, cannot accept Camilla Parker Bowles as their queen, and cannot accept the man whose conduct indirectly led to the death of Diana as their king. There's another new constituency. As it's turned out, although I have always known it, Prince Charles is a globalist stooge. He is a man in thrall to the alphabet soup, WEF, WHO, UNO, any fad, any new thing, he fastens onto it with an extraordinary gusto, even when there is no basis for it, and even when his now subjects are increasingly opposed to it. His statement, for example, in the German Bundestag just a couple of weeks ago, made it clear he was wholly opposed to Britain leaving another of his favourite acronyms, the EU. But it's not his business to be for or against Britain leaving the EU. That was our business, and we decided it. And for the man who's supposed to be our king to go abroad and disrespect the will of the British people, worst of all in Berlin, in the Bundestag, was an affront. His kissing and cuddling, cavorting, rubbing cheeks with Klaus Schwab, with the Greta Thunbergs, with the faddists of the climate change issue, the faddists of gender change, the faddists of LGBTQ+++, is anathema to millions of Charles's subjects who would once have been the loyal monarchists that they were during the reign of his mother, Queen Elizabeth. A woman just wrote on my social media, I was a royalist, and then the Queen died, and that was that. And I think that that feeling is abroad, widespread in Britain. And I'll get a better idea of that when I see what you are voting on what is turning out to be a bumper poll on all the platforms that I have mentioned. I'm dedicating this show to the two great events that occurred on this day, and not coincidentally. The greatest and most important of them took place in Berlin on this day in 1945. The banner of victory was hoisted over the rubble of the German capital of Berlin, which was intended to be the center of a 1,000-year Reich, in which all Jews would have been annihilated, in which all Slavs would have been annihilated, all gay people, all disabled people, all people with mental illness, all Jehovah's Witnesses, all adherents of any ideology or religion that challenged the idea of Hitler fascism and his allies, Mussolini in Italy and Tojo in Japan, who brought about the deaths of 100 million people almost in the course of their rule. A rule which was intended to last, as I say, for 1,000 years. What could be more of a debt which any country, any people could owe than the debt we owe to the men that raised that banner over the Reichstag and the army from which they came, which at the cost of unbelievable sacrifice, 26 million Soviet citizens died, predominantly Russians, but all the former republics of the Soviet Union made up a Red Army, made up a civilian defense force, made up a force of partisans, made up a workforce whose military industrial production made possible the victory of the Red Army on this day in 1945. How much more could you owe somebody than to have defeated the genocidal maniacs who might otherwise still be ruling your country and mine, who might otherwise have still us under their jackboot, might still be operating their gas chambers and their concentration camps. What more could any country owe than a debt of gratitude to the people that liberated us? There was an old man, almost 100 years old, in Poland last week, in front of the Polish Prime Minister and other grandees of the Polish state, listening to them talking about the victory of the Allies, the liberation of the camps, without ever mentioning the Russian army, the Red Army. So he, when the microphone was passed to him, as the last remaining survivor of the Warsaw Uprising, when the Jewish ghetto rose up against the fascist beasts that massacred 4 million of them, Jews and non-Jews in Poland. 4 million had been massacred. And he made two very important points that you will never see on any syllabus or ever hear on any so-called mainstream media. He said, we were massacred by Poles, by Ukrainians, as well as Germans. And secondly, he said, I don't know what history books you've been reading. I was liberated by the Soviet Red Army and nobody else. Can you imagine how well that went down amongst the Polish grandees who seek to rewrite history, who seek to forgive the mass murderers and give them weapons and take money from them? Weapons to the Ukrainians, money from the Germans, thank you very much. Who seek to forgive the perpetrators of the Holocaust in the East and West, and demonize the very people whose victory meant their liberation, whose efforts liberated those camps and those remaining Jews and others who were dying, starving, and at risk of annihilation within them. I could talk all night on these matters, as you know, but I will quickly move on to this. Also on this day, the Vietnamese people smashed down the gates of the American embassy in what was then called Saigon, now Ho Chi Minh City. Smashed down the gates. The American diplomats, journalists, so-called, and other factotums were escaping from the roof in a helicopter, many of which fell from the sky, so many were on board. And so many of the factotums were kicked into the dust and told their services to the United States Empire were no longer required. This victory of Ho Chi Minh, General Giap, and the millions of women and men, fighters, in the North Vietnamese army and in the Viet Cong in South Vietnam, is one that so many of our people now know nothing about. It was my bread and butter. I followed it hourly every day of my young life. This victory on this day in 1975 was the happiest day I can recall in my entire life. Yet so many have forgotten it. Not least in the United States of America, which is hardly surprising. They've forgotten the truth about the Second World War. They've forgotten what happened in the Korean War. They've forgotten what happened in the Vietnam War. My goodness, they've even forgotten what happened when the Taliban routed them just 2 years ago, and they had to steal from the country like thieves in the night. And talking of thieves in the night, the Scottish police have intensified their investigation into the ruling party in my country, the separatist, nationalist, so-called Scottish Nationalist Party, have intensified their investigation, now widened it into something so dark that if established, if it leads to charges, if it leads to a conviction, it will be the death of that nationalist party and hopefully the death of their hateful, narrow-minded bigotry. It's this. The police are investigating whether or not people who left millions of pounds in their will, well-meaning people, who left money in their will to the SNP, thinking they were doing something good for the cause they believed in, separate independence for Scotland, may have had that money falsely used, may have had that money criminally purloined. It is leading now the Scottish national media, in the newspapers, not yet on the television, they'll be last to report it. But in the Sunday Mail, Daily Record, the Scottish edition of the Daily Mirror, Sunday Mirror in Scotland, they've got the receipts. And my goodness, how damning are they? Because if true, what this represents is grave robbing that Burke and Hare might have had the grace to be ashamed of. Fasten your seatbelts. I told you, it's going to be a bumpy night. It's the mother of all talk shows, after all.
Mr. President, we got a report of a 50-foot woman marauding through Washington, sir.
Thank you, Captain. But I'm looking for a shorter woman, one who likes to take long strolls in the park and yell at minorities.
She's not looking for a date. She's terrorizing the city.
Is there a difference? A little levity. Call in the military.
We are the military, sir.
Boy, we got here fast. We better do something, right?
Shall I scramble the jets, Mr. President?
No thanks. I'll just take a muffin and some coffee.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
You can have your say, of course, on the telephone. I've no idea what you're going to say, and therefore no idea how I'm going to respond. It's entirely up to you. You can have your say on what I've said or on any other matter. If you're in Britain or Ireland, here's the number. 08081 965522. 08081 965522. It is entirely free of charge, as it is if you're in the US or Canada, where the number is +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. And if you are in the rest of the world, which, let's face it, is most people in the world, overwhelmingly most people in the world, the number is 44203 966 2625. 44203 966 2625. I told you the poll was going great guns. If you stand up in your living room and swear allegiance to the king, are you A, patriotic, or B, idiotic? You can vote on my Twitter, on my YouTube channel, if you're watching on YouTube right now, on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, or on the YouTube community poll. Now, according to Bloomberg, 40% of the world's economic growth this year will be produced by China. China's current growth rate for this year is almost 5 times, more than 4 times greater than that in the United States. And of course, in many other countries, it isn't growth at all, but recession that we are looking at. Prices in Germany rose by 17% in the last month. 17% supermarket prices. And that was down from 25% the month before that. Wages in Germany, of course, are not rising at either 25 or 17 or half of 17, perhaps a third of 17. Who knows? the standard of living of the people, of the countries that are doing the sanctioning of Russia and threatening sanctions against China is plummeting. Unemployment rising, underemployment booming, wages slumping. How different to the situation in China. In fact, the only thing that we are competing with China in is the number of warships that we are dispatching to the South China Sea, to the Straits of Taiwan, where incidentally Taiwan has just officially gone into recession. I can safely say that the most popular of all the guests we have ever had from China, Li Jingjing, is that favorite, and I'm glad to say she joins me again now. Li Jingjing, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. It just seems like yesterday you were showing us around these temples, and we had such a wonderful Moats show from Beijing. Now memories that will be treasured forever, but the stories that we talked about go on and on, particularly the Taiwan one. The issue of Taiwan has now been elevated in Western discourse, official discourse, and their state-controlled media into an existential one for us. Borrell, the EU foreign minister, last week demanded that European countries send their navies all the way to the Straits of Taiwan to patrol it, because more or less, he said, that has become our border. The European Union's border has become Taiwan. How do Chinese people see all this build-up?
Hi, George. Yes, so good to be back on your show. So before I answer a question, allow me to send holiday greetings to you and everybody who is watching this program, because Beijing time is few hours ahead of UK time. So I'm officially on May the 1st, which is International Labour's Day. So I would like to wish you and the Workers' Party of Great Britain and all the working class who is watching Moats, and everybody who is watching Moats right now, a very happy International Labour's Day, very important day as well. So we have a holiday, national holiday nowadays. Everybody's traveling. So I just want to say that to everybody before I answer the questions. And about Taiwan, and you can see the Western alliance is is impatient. Like every time you hear China and the US will be at war over Taiwan, and they always have a specific time. They're gonna be at war in 2025. They're gonna be at war in 2027. And I'm just curious, where did they get the specific time? Because China never mentioned a time. Every time it's coming from the Western politicians, US politicians, European politicians, even though they are thousands of miles away from the Pacific, from this border. So, I mean, just a few months ago, I discussed with my friend from Taiwan and some friends from Chinese mainland as well. And every time they predict a war either in 2025 or 2027, they are not just feeling it, they are actually planning it. So it's very hilarious, because the Western media, through which some politicians twisted the facts, because if you only read Western media, you will feel it's the Chinese mainland that bullied Taiwan. Hence, the Europe and the United States feels so righteous to send warships to defend Taiwan, which they called democracy, which is hilarious, because it's I think a few months ago, I remember this reports on CNN. A CNN reporter sit on a U.S. fighter jet flying over South China Sea, and of course, South China Sea, which is 8,300 miles away from U.S. borders. And the reporter sits on the U.S. fighter jet over South China Sea and saying, "See, the Chinese fighter is intercepting our plane. How aggressive Chinese fighters are!" They don't even realize how hilarious that sounds. Why are you over here? And probably many people, if you they don't know the geography between Chinese mainland and Taiwan. Chinese and Taiwan, mainland and Taiwan is so close to each other. The shortest distance between the two parts is actually 133 kilometers. So you're literally in our borders, in our sky. You cannot send warships over our border and not expecting some reactions from China. And we also have to, don't forget, over the past few years, through Western-sponsored think tanks, organizations like NED, millions of US dollars dumped into Taiwan and brainwash local people, trying to rewrite the history, tell the local people, you're not Chinese, even though they're speaking Chinese language, practice all the Chinese customs, they're trying to rewrite the history. So even though sometimes the local people in Taiwan think we are different from the Chinese mainland, we favor the United States, is that really what they think? Is that they're really their own thoughts, or the millions of US dollars dumped into this island and brainwash the local people what to believe?
Well, money is one thing, of course, but weapons and military personnel are now being dumped into what is a part of China, at least according to the British government, the US government, all Western governments, the United Nations, etc. All of them accept that Taiwan is part of China, at least on paper. But their actions speak louder than those words. And now we have 200 at least 200 American military trainers. That's how it all began in Vietnam, of course, with the dispatching of American military trainers, which became an army so vast that 58,000 American servicemen were killed in Vietnam in the course of not 20 years. So they've put these trainers now in Taiwan. They're supplying ever more sophisticated weaponry, including cruise missiles. They're openly calling on each other to send their warships to the region. As you say, these are not so much predictions of war in 25 or in 27, but determinations that they are going to have a war with China. Does that make the Chinese people nervous? And is there a countervailing force that says, well, if they're going to make war on us in 2025, maybe we better take whatever action is necessary now in 2023?
So I can assure you, Chinese people, they definitely want reunification with Taiwan. The peaceful reunification between Chinese mainland and Taiwan is always the ultimate solution, ultimate goal for Chinese people. And it's hilarious because Western media, some politicians keep trying to describe Chinese government as the irrational one, as the one that force unification through violence. Actually, no, the government is very restrained, is very always, if you read the Chinese government official stance, is always put peaceful reunification as the ultimate goal. If you ask random Chinese people on Chinese mainland, they want reunification tomorrow. That's like, why are some of them, if you go around on the street talking to local people, they're like, we cannot wait anymore. So why are you lighting these people doing this to Taiwan, which is our territory? We've been through enough the humiliation. And many people in the West probably don't realize that the island, Taiwan, is probably the last symbol of the century of humiliation for Chinese people. It was taken by the Japan during the colonial times, and that forced the decades-long separation from the mainland. And also very interesting, like some Western politicians, when they try to rewrite histories, when during the Japanese colonial rule, when they tried to cede the territory from China, in their Japanese documents, it recognized Taiwan is part of China. So it was during the Sino-Japanese War during the 1894 to 1894, because of Qing Dynasty, which was China back then, lost to Japan. So they signed this treaty, the treaty called Shimonoseki, that gave some territory of China to Japan, include some islands in Liaoning province and also the Taiwan island. Just a little history backgrounds to those who don't know. That was the first period that Taiwan was forced to separate from Chinese mainland. And of course, then because of the civil war between CPC and KMT, Kuomintang, Chiang Kai-shek, the then leader of the Republic of China, fled to Taiwan. But even when he fled to Taiwan, he never wanted independence. He was fighting with CPC, who is the rightful government, represents China at the global stage. Chiang Kai-shek wants Taiwan, where he fled to represent whole China at the international stage, which is ridiculous because the majority of China's population is on the mainland. But even for him, even during the Civil War, he never wanted independence. And then there were some people, the opportunists in Taiwan, and using the opportunities of the internal conflicts between different groups, and then the outsiders like Western forces try to use these internal conflicts, trying to sponsor them and try to change the history. So it is very important for China, because of this complicated history, this forced separation between Chinese mainland and Taiwan. The reunification with Taiwan is very important for Chinese people. No Chinese people will allow its territory being taken by colonial powers, by empires again. So this is like, we definitely will see a peaceful reunification. And the aggression by United States or Europe will only make it faster.
Taiwan, as I said earlier, has now moved officially into recession, whilst the Chinese economy is booming. I saw with my own eyes. As you know, it was 25 years since I had last been in Beijing. 25 years on, it was literally jaw-dropping, the pace and the scale of Chinese development. That must be something that Taiwan people have in their mind, that the West is able to send warships, but their economy is now being damaged by anti-China policies on the chip industry, for example. Anti-China policies are costing both South Korea and Taiwan opportunities for economic growth. They are damaging the material interests of the people of Taiwan. That must be a factor in Taiwan people's minds, I would have thought. And they have an election coming up, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. So we will see what's going to happen during that election. And I think the nominees right now, the DPP proposing is also a separatist. And I think, let's see, because I think many people, because of the, as my friend who is from Taiwan, Zhong Xiangyu mentioned, like, because many media in Taiwan is just kind of like Chinese translation of Western media. So they don't really portray Chinese mainland or many things on the global stage as fair as we saw. So many who, even if they didn't have the chance to grow up or study or live in the United States or in Europe, all those countries, they still live in this bubble that United States represents the best democracy in the world. So and also their mindset, their impressions about the Chinese mainland is so backwards. Sometimes we in the mainland laugh about some programs in Taiwan, just so ridiculous. Because some of the politicians in Taiwan that say, Chinese people in the mainland is so poor, they cannot even afford eating this boiled egg. 茶叶蛋 is very Chinese typical dessert. It like boiled the chicken with tea, but very tasty. But it's very cheap snack that we eat at breakfast. So even a few years ago, they're like, like Chinese mainland people, they cannot eat that, they cannot eat that. And just a few weeks ago, probably 2 weeks ago, a program said, the high-speed rail, the train don't have a back support on the train. So I mean, all these ridiculous claims, like what have you tried the high-speed rail in Chinese mainland? It's so fast. So some of them are trapped in their bubble with their same narratives, talking to themselves, echo chamber. So they're still in the illusion that United States as the become democracy, freest country in the world, and Chinese mainland is still so backward, probably like 40 years ago. So that I think that also makes some people still have this red scare towards the CPC and towards the mainland. So how to fix that, I really don't know, because it's a very complex issues. I just want to mention one thing, since I remember you mentioned the Europe and the United States sending all the warships, all the military forces, arms sales to Taiwan. In March, during a press conference with our foreign minister, Jingjing, and he said something I think really makes sense, because the US-led West always say you should respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. But they constantly violate the sovereignty and territorial integrity of China, because if your country has a diplomatic relations with China, that means your government recognizes there's only one China, and Beijing represents the only China government. And they said Taiwan is part of China. Google, go to your government's website. It says that United Nations also recognize that. So they violate China's sovereignty. And also, United States keeps warning China to not send weapons to Russia. Well, in fact, they constantly sell all kinds of arms to Taiwan, shitty arms to Taiwan. So they're so double standards, hypocritical, asking other people to do that, while in reality they are doing the other. So their international rule-based order is just some rule to restrict others. And they don't follow those rules at all.
You bet. Thank you very much, Li Jingjing, for reappearing in front of our eyes on the mother of all talk shows. Let's not make it long before you are back. Very much obliged to you. Well, look, it's overwhelming. If you stand up in your living room and swear allegiance to the king, are you A, patriotic, 15%, B, idiotic, 85%. That's on Twitter. On YouTube, it's patriotic 7%, idiotic 93%. On Telegram, patriotic 6%, idiotic 94%. And on YouTube community poll, patriotic 10%, idiotic 90%. Unbelievable. Let me give you the phone numbers again. If you're in the UK or Ireland, 08081965522. If you're in the US or Canada, it's +1 844 944 3344. And if you're in the rest of the world, it's 44 203 966 2625. Give me a quick break. I'll be right back.
As the green smoke rose, their faces flashed out, pallid green, and faded again as it vanished. Then slowly the hissing passed into a humming, into a long, loud, droning noise. Suddenly, a humped shape rose out of the pit, and the ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out after it. Forthwith, flashes of actual flame, a bright glare leaping from one to another, sprang from the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet impinged upon them and flashed into white flame. It was as if each man were suddenly and momentarily turned to fire.
That's me on my Patreon page, narrating H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. More of that coming your way. Thank you to all my patrons, and also, of course, in particular, to the new Moats graduate level alumni, and the many different ways. Legend, you can become a legend on my Patreon page, a Moats legend. Just think about that. I'm very grateful to you because I do depend on the support of that Patreon page. Now, let's hear from Florida, where our legend, I think we can now say he's a legend, Simon, wants to talk about China. Simon in Florida, welcome to the show.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway, and obviously good evening to all your listening audience as well. I was surprised somewhat that your delightful guest there didn't mention the incredible successes that China has had on Thursday of this week. And we're on the cusp, hours away, literally, of potentially one of their greatest diplomatic successes in many, many years. So if I quickly run your listeners through these three issues. On Thursday, well ahead of the Americans, the Chinese Navy, with ships carrying special forces, which fortunately did not have to be deployed, successfully rescued almost 700 Chinese citizens from the war-stricken nation of Sudan, and quickly ferried them across to the Red Sea, where they were cooperating closely with the Saudi Arabian government at the port of Jeddah. And what was amazing there was, even though the Americans had vastly greater resources and Britain was much, much closer with its base in Cyprus, the on-station Chinese commander, armed with only a destroyer and a supply ship in very much an SAS type of attitude, said, "What the heck, we're going with what we've got," and took an enormous supply ship with him. Even though it was hard to defend should conflict have arisen, he was able to get many, many more people on the ship, and then made a return visit. And one of the people who came off the ship said a line almost exactly like the second movie, Wolf Warrior, which is the nickname of the current Chinese foreign minister. And she said something very similar to the end of the movie, which was, "China's strength will always support you," with tears running down her face. This has been an absolutely incredible propaganda success for the Chinese government, and the Chinese Navy are rightly enormously proud of their achievement in this regard. On the same day, and despite intense interference from the United States military and the United States diplomatic service, the very same foreign minister who's nicknamed the Wolf Warrior, Mr. Jingjing, who your guest just mentioned.
Yeah, I know him actually.
He pulled off a enormous success in getting what is called the C5 countries, which is Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, to agree to sign a number of agreements that will safeguard the transit route from China all the way to Europe for the cargo trains. And they announced an enormous $58 billion investment to build a high-speed train line diagonally across the country of Pakistan to the new port of Gwadar on the Gulf of Oman. So these are just monumentous achievements, and the Chinese government and the people have seen that China has repeatedly beaten the Americans, who they are repeatedly describing as the hegemonic force. And now, very quickly, the final issue that people can literally watch on their television screens late at night in Europe and during the daytime in America, and they are waking up to soon in China. We have the presidential and parliamentary elections for the small South American nation of Paraguay. And why that is so incredibly important is because that is the last country in South America that currently recognizes Taiwan as being the government of the whole of China, as you were just discussing. If, as the polls are indicating, though the voting is still underway for another 4 hours approximately, and the center-left party, who were leading very slightly in the newspaper opinion polls, they have committed to change that recognition to the People's Republic of China, which would allow the trade agreement, the free trade agreement with all 6 nations of Mercosur, which is Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, and Venezuela, that's been on hold for 10 years because Paraguay's current government didn't recognize the People's Republic of China. All of that will change, and it will be another enormous change from American dominance of South America to very close trade relations from basically the whole of South America with the government of China.
I told you he was a legend, didn't I, Simon? Thanks for that brilliant update and summary of Chinese diplomatic triumphs over the course of the last few days. Let's stay in America, go to Seattle, and talk with Nathan about D-Day. Go ahead, Nathan.
Hey, George. I appreciate the points your previous viewer made, and I love the fact that you brought on someone from China to provide new perspectives. I admire what they're doing, trying to bring world peace to the Middle East. Government officials in my country say that's a threat because it's a threat to the profits of the military-industrial complex.
It's a threat of a good example, Nathan.
Yeah. The first time I called you, it was to disagree with you on, you said that your government is too inept to continue running the world. And I was trying to illustrate the point that Britain is pretty much the brains behind this whole operation. America, we are the body, the muscle. The CIA was made in the likeness of MI6, and you know, the CIA has overthrown American government officials, killed presidents like RFK's uncle and his dad. But yeah, one of the things that's like truly astonishing is Russia sacrificed the most to stop the Nazis, while your government, my government, propped them up. We brought them in through Operation Paperclip. But when you search for like casualties from World War I, now they started rewriting it, saying it's Belarus instead of Russia, and they show the casualties as Belarus. That's like something that I've noticed is truly jarring for me, and I really would like to get away, you know, from the fascism, because as we all know that the Germans lost World War II, but fascism won. And we still continue to see mechanisms of control preventing us from getting out of this death spiral of military poisoning our water, poisoning our food, while profiting a very small group of so-called elites so they can continue to plunder us for more money than they could ever spend. Because I always ask, what can you get with $2 billion that you can't get with $1, let alone $100 billion? But like these people, they will take. It's like a sickness, you know. Like if you were hoarding anything else, any other resource to that extent, like you'd be certifiable. If I had 1 billion cats, so many cats I could never pet them, people would be like, "What's wrong with you?" But when someone is like Bill Gates is on track to be a trillionaire before he dies, and I just like I wonder, when are we going to take to the streets like the people in France? And I look forward to it. And you know, if you need help organizing, I'm trying to start something on my website, nateflix.net. I've been censored on all major social media for just trying to elucidate these points. But the real solution is, I mean, I'm rooting for RFK Jr. You know, I know he's running as a Democrat. I understand the people concerned that he might disappoint like Bernie did. But the real solution is going to be a grassroots movement where you come together with your neighbors who look different, think different, like are different, and we start putting humanity over these corporations, and we start to understand the power that we have. We have the numbers. They got the robot dogs, but we need to, once we stop funding them, these are the people who are oppressing us. We are funding our oppressors, and they are lying to us. When peace is a threat to their business model, their business needs to go out. So that's really all.
Well, that's a very powerful, a very, very powerful tour of the horizon, Nathan. Thank you for that in Seattle. Let me give you some super chats. Now, if you want to support the show, it's basically to support the midweek mother of all talk shows, which no longer has a sponsor and cannot continue indefinitely without a sponsor or without the financial support from you, the viewers. So if you value the work that I'm doing, that my friends with me are doing, please give. And the best way to give is on the super chat. And there on the screen now, it tells you how to do that. Michael Harvey did. He's given 20 British pounds. Thank you, Michael. Jazz gives 50 British pounds. Only a fool believes this king is for the people, says Jazz. He's not. He's aligned with dark forces of the elites who wish to destroy humanity. However, we the people have the ultimate sovereignty under the Magna Carta, and we have the legal right to protest. Well, we can definitely start protesting by not standing up on Saturday and chanting the ludicrous mantra, "May the king live forever." What an idea. Dr. Tolstoyevsky gives £10. Gigi, you're spot on regarding the king. I will certainly not be swearing allegiance to him or any royal, not ever. A centre-left UK republic now, please. Thank you for highlighting the USSR's role in World War II also. Thank you, Doctor. Summer of 1970, it was a great summer, sends $10 US. Live war deaths on TV during the Vietnam War, and Cronkite saying the war cannot be won. Plane loads of coffins returned home and on TV. That's how long ago we had a free press in the USA. Brilliantly observed, my friend. And Joe Macheke gives £4.99. Thank you for that, Joe. Kings used to ride ahead of armies into battle. The only thing Charles rides on is the shoulders of his predecessors. God forgive me some unworthy thoughts that just went through my mind. And on the YouTube chat, grateful to all of you who are contributing. George, can you have a vote on nationalism versus globalism? It's a false dichotomy, that one, Michael. Which nationalism? For whom would have to be a qualification? Back to the lines. Simon is in London on the coronation. Go ahead, Simon.
Hi, George. Hope you're well, mate. Firstly, I must commend you, and I hope Barbara Broccoli is listening, because in your opening speech, you probably came up with one of the best titles of a James Bond film, Everyone Must Live and Everyone Must Die. I mean, it'd make a great title for a Bond film, no doubt, with some diva like Shirley Bassey belting out the lyrics.
Excellent. Good idea.
In your survey, like I said, you've asked whether individuals should recite this prayer, wishing Charles an eternal life, or either patriotic or being idiotic, you know. And I do think there's a third option there, like being masochistic, because one would have to be either clinically insane or enjoy bending over and being whipped on their bare buttocks if they enjoy the sheer pain, if they think that Charles should live forever, because the amount of pain he's causing the farmers and manufacturers and truckers, just to name a few groups, through his blind support of this green agenda that he supports, is clear evidence. I mean, this is a man who makes decisions based on labor science. I've read a lot about him from different papers. He only wants to hear science that matches his own preferences and, of course, his own bank account. I mean, a couple of years ago, I think in 2009, I read, he was trying to push this product known as Dutchy Herbal's Detox Teacher. And it was a supplement of dandelion and anti-artichoke with other nonsense chemicals. As I said, no scientific backing at all, and yet he's a quack, and he's allowed to, the papers easily just push this forward and allow him to push this. Now, I'm not a fan of Diana, George, because I think she was even more stupid than Charles. However, the fact that people just don't know how stupid this man is quite simply, and he's quite simply an emperor with no clothes, in the same way they think Zelensky's the good guy and Putin is the bad guy, just shows the dangers of flag waving and what flag waving can actually do, and how it totally...
A quack, a crank, a king. You decide. Actually, you don't decide. He's already the king. You didn't get a choice on whether to spend £250 million putting a gold crown on his head next Saturday, a crown, moreover, festooned in the largest diamonds stolen from other people. I'll be right back after a short break with the one and only Jackson Hinkle. He'll be joining me from the United States. What a duo. Lee Jingjing and Jackson Hinkle. Can there be a more handsome duo anywhere on the air this evening? I don't think so. See you in a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As vicious as the Twitter sphere, where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Joe Biden is plumbing new depths of derangement in the course of his re-election campaign. In fact, he's not quite sure whether he's fighting for the re-election of Joe Biden or the re-election of Donald Trump. You think I'm making that up? Watch this.
Because we cannot get re-elected, we cannot win this re-election. Excuse me, we can only re-elect Donald Trump. Because we cannot get re-elected, we cannot win this re-election. Excuse me, we can only re-elect Donald Trump.
I mean, the audience literally laughing in his face, as were these hypocrites of the so-called press corps over the last couple of days. Joe Biden said that truth matters and that journalism is not a crime. And all of these supine, slavering hacks applauded him, showered him with adulation. None of them stood up and said, "You are trying to extradite the greatest journalist of them all. Mr. Julian Assange is in a torture hell in London as a result of your extradition attempt. And if he does come and face a hanging judge and a kangaroo court in Virginia, he'll go down for 175 years. What do you mean journalism is not a crime? What do you mean truth matters?" Although truthfully, Joe Biden probably has no recollection of any of it and probably didn't write any of it. And when he's required to say something that somebody else wrote, you saw the result there on the screen. Who better to give us his overview on the current state of American politics than the US-based political analyst, host of The Dive, and all-round, all-American guy, Jackson Hinkle. Jackson, welcome back after some time onto the mother of all talk shows. I don't know if the American people know just what a figure of fun Joe Biden is becoming. I'm not sure if it's fun or tragedy or both. Do the American people know that?
You'd hope that they do, but there's a lot of Americans who still claim that they would support Joe Biden in a 2024 candidacy, which is just insane. But less and less Americans support Biden as the days go on. And I don't think it has anything to do, unfortunately, with his mental decline, because that's been apparent for years on end before he even entered the White House. I think it has to do with the decline of the state of our country. It has to do with the fact that he is responsible for the Nord Stream bombings. It has to do with the fact that he's taking us to war with not just Russia, but China as well. And, there's been a series of pretty damning leaks that have come out over the past several months surrounding his son, Hunter Biden, and these Twitter files and what the Biden administration is doing to censor everyday Americans. I think that's what's turning the tide. But for me, of course, the mental decline is reason enough to not give him a first or second chance to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, before we leave that point, and I agree with you, it's not the only point, but before we leave that point, this man is, at least nominally, in control of thousands of thermonuclear weapons. He has the power not to declare war, but to start war, and is the commander-in-chief of an armed force on which as much money has been spent as has been spent collectively by the next, I think it's 16 countries in the world. That makes him capable of ending the world, and he's not really capable of being sent out safely for a loaf, or as my good friend Lionel puts it, would you let Joe Biden drive you home from the airport? And if the answer to that is no, why are you allowing him to be in charge of the fate of the world?
Yeah, I wouldn't let him drive me home from the airport, and I wouldn't let him babysit my kids either. So there's two things that I think are pretty stark problems with the president of the United States. But and he's at the White House press corps dinner. He's making jokes this week about how he doesn't take questions from any of them. And anytime he gets before the press, he just smiles and walks off before they have any time to ask him questions. So it really is insane. And I don't think it's going to end anytime soon. I think, obviously, as with age, it's sad, but as the days go on, he's going to deteriorate more and more and more. And that's why he's definitely not going to be having any debates with, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or Marianne Williamson. Think what you want of these individuals, of these candidates, but they deserve a debate, I think. I mean, we live in a country where this sort of thing is treasured. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is definitely bringing up some pretty good points. Unfortunately, the Biden administration is not only refusing to debate him or Marianne or any other candidate, but the Biden administration appears to be influencing not just big tech, but also now mainstream media cable companies to censor his opposing candidates like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., which is illegal and unconstitutional. And it's just very troubling for the future of our country.
Yeah, we'll come back to RFK if we can, but you mentioned, and I do see her name now, Marianne Williamson. Forgive my ignorance, I know nothing at all about her, and I'm sure that I'm not the only one that's watching that doesn't. Give us a kind of pen picture of who she is and what she stands for.
Personally, I'm not a big fan of Marianne Williamson. She's a woke warrior, and she's, I would say, tantamount to like the equivalent of Bernie Sanders today. Once champion of all things that seem to be good, but now has just proven to be an utter fraud and a tool of the Democratic Party and the deep state. I think the only reason why she's running is so she can sell more of her books. She has books that she's trying to sell. Not many people are buying. But, it's sad because these are the people who a couple years ago were saying we need to oppose war in the war state. And now they're saying we're not sending enough money to Ukraine. And, I think we should be concerned about Taiwan next,
Well, let's draw a veil over Marianne quickly. I wish I hadn't asked. RFK, on the other hand, he's hitting some bull's eyes, on issue after issue. He is managing to be a bridge, managing to unite people that would have regarded themselves as being on the left and people that would have regarded themselves as being on the right. That's quite a formidable talent, isn't it?
It is. Over 50% of Democratic voters say that they have a favorable view of RFK Jr. It looks like he's polling at about 18% right now. Marianne Williamson's polling at 16%. Joe Biden seems to be claiming the rest of the votes. And that's much better than I think a lot of people assumed RFK Jr. was going to be doing right out of the gate. Not only that, but the famed American political strategist Roger Stone put forward the idea of a Trump-Kennedy ticket in 2024, which I think is very interesting. As with any candidate or any person, I can't say I agree with them all the time on everything. And even some of the issues I hold most near and dear to my heart, the guy doesn't perfectly align. But when you have a candidate for president polling at 18% in a primary who's saying that he wants to close down all of the foreign U.S. military bases, I think we have over 700 of them. And he says that he wants to take down big pharma and, remove their ability to completely control the press in this country. I think that should be celebrated.
Now, on the subject of press and media, there have been, of course, quite seismic events. I was ruminating on them earlier today with an important media guy. This sacking of Tucker Carlson, a man who was regularly turning in with every show, 3 million audience, in other words, a little over double our audience on the mother of all talk shows. He was getting paid $1.6 million a month for his achievement. I'm not paid that for mine or anything at all. But he was in the small whirlpool of American television audiences nowadays, a big hitter. And he was scoring these numbers because he was, on some subjects at least, not just telling the truth fearlessly and eloquently, but telling truths that would not be allowed to appear anywhere else. And lo and behold, hey presto, are now not allowed on Fox News. He's been sacked, but he took to Twitter to speak to us next. And 65 million people, not 3 million, 65 million people. Are we witnessing the death of terrestrial TV, do you think, Jackson?
Well, if there's no one interesting on the mainstream media and the corporate press, then of course it's the death of it. After they fired Tucker Carlson, and some people are asking the question, was it truly a mutual departure of Tucker's absence from Fox News? No, he was fired. He was let know 10 minutes prior to being fired that this was the decision that Fox executives had made. And I guess they're still negotiating his exit package, but he was fired, and this is the end of the end. Fox News's prime time viewership sunk below MSNBC's viewership last night for the first time in I don't know how long, definitely before Tucker Carlson was there. This is a clear indication that Tucker was a popular voice. It's not that anyone trusts the mainstream media, and without him, it's null and void.
Yeah, I mean, it feels that way to me. I mean, let me make the now compulsory a caveat that there are many, many things I entirely disagree with Tucker Carlson about, but some important things on which I agree with him. But none of that is relevant. What is relevant is that we have access to lots of different voices, lots of different points of view. Isn't that what American capitalism was supposed to be about? Let the customer pick from a free choice the voices, the programs, the points of view that they like. Isn't that what free enterprise was supposed to be about?
It was, freedom in the marketplace. That's why we've got to censor any dissidents and sanction any countries that we don't like, right? But, Tucker, Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of the Russian Federation, he spoke at the United Nations in New York City last week, and he said that with Tucker Carlson gone from Fox News, it's not only very troubling, but it's clear that without him, there will be a severe loss in the diversity of views held in the mainstream press corps in the United States. And that's not because Tucker carried with him a lot of other co-hosts on Fox News, of course, that carried the same line or echoed the same points. He was the only one. He was the only one who spoke out about the wars in Ukraine, China, even a little bit towards the end of his time there, Syria, Venezuela, coup attempts, stopping Trump's warmongering against Iran and Syria and Afghanistan. I mean, the guy challenged both party orthodoxies. And yeah, there's things that I disagree with him on as well, of course. But when you talk about the issues that matter most, Julian Assange and the permanent war state and censorship in this country, I think he was right on the money.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not that the people who thought that are going to shrug and say, well, I'll watch some no-mark that's now in his chair, because 2/3 of the audience disappeared after Carlson was sacked. So the people who liked hearing Tucker Carlson are going to want to continue hearing him. They'll migrate to wherever else he goes, and it won't be MSNBC, I hazard a guess. It will not be CNN. It will be presumably to what are now the outer limits, but which are perhaps rapidly becoming the new mainstream. I think we're living in quite revolutionary times in terms of media, don't you?
It's all changing. For the first time, this public square, if you will, is being reinvented as to where we can air out our opinions freely. And I think in this coming presidential election, you're going to see that more and more with the censorship of Democrats like Bobby K. Jr. and probably Republicans like Trump. I think we're going to see more and more voices probably trying to get their message across on platforms like Twitter or like Rumble. But they still have their problems, and hopefully they'll be fixed. I mean, I still think that you are suppressed in the algorithm. And for a while, Elon kept your Russian state-affiliated media tag up, which was just insane. So they still have their problems. They're not perfect, but it's much better than what we had just a few years ago, where any and all major platforms were completely controlled by big tech, and there was no alternatives.
I was just ruminating for a second there, Jackson, about that dream team that you floated in front of our eyes, en passant. Donald Trump and Bobby Kennedy Jr. in double harness would be unstoppable in the presidential election. Don't you think? I mean, I've never thought of that one before. It seems so too incongruous. But actually, there are many things on which they agree. And if they could get an agreed manifesto, program for government, and so on, that could be an unstoppable ticket.
I think it would be unstoppable. I think Trump is already pretty unstoppable. But I think adding Kennedy, a Democrat, lifelong Democrat, to the mix, someone who comes from a family of American royalty, I think that would be entirely unstoppable. My only question about it is, when you get into those very powerful families in any country, sometimes they have their disagreements and, personal spats that go back decades. And I don't know. I definitely seems like the Trump family is not that close with the Kennedy family or the Cuomo family, which are connected now. But we'll see. Maybe they'll put those spats aside and choose the greater good for our country and unite. I think it would be pretty beautiful.
If Trump were to promise to reopen the Kennedy files, who killed Jack Kennedy, who killed Bobby Kennedy, which I actually sent Trump a letter during his presidency encouraging him to do, that would put the cat amongst the pigeons and might even be an incentive to Bobby to hook up with him in double harness in an election campaign. I could talk to you all night. Jackson Hinkle, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Been a pleasure. How's the poll doing? If you stand up in your living room and swear allegiance to the king, are you patriotic or nuts? Are you patriotic or idiotic? Well, 12,571 people have voted. The polls are still open. Get your vote in now, but it's not looking great for the Patriots. I'll be right back after this quick break. A big thanks to the people who support me on the Patreon page. I really have come to depend on the income from that. It costs £1 a week, not even the price of a cup of coffee in an insalubrious cafe. If you think you could stretch to that, please support me on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. Now, the Moats team have added a tiered system on my Patreon page where you can become an official Moats graduate. How about that? I speak as someone who graduated from nowhere, from the factory floor in Michelin. But you can become a Moats graduate and legend. You can give a regular donation to support the show and my work. You can now upgrade from a mere Patreon to a Moats graduate at £10 a month, as opposed to £5 a month, I think it is. And you can receive official Moats legend status for £20.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
A most sincere thanks to all my Patreon supporters. New legend status has been awarded to David Lane. David, I'm deeply grateful to you. And you are now officially a legend. As is Graham Briggs White, also now a Moats legend. Graham says, I've taken what you said on board and upped my donation. We cannot lose you, as it is all that gives me hope, along with a handful of others. Keep it up, George. As long as God gives me breath, Graham, thank you. Andy says that actually this is a false dichotomy. Are you patriotic or idiotic? Can't you be a patriotic idiot? And J. Kent Cassidy says, a totally propagandized citizen of the hegemonic empire. And Martin Brooks says, I quite like the system where the head of state is chosen by accident of birth. Think of all the godforsaken people we might have had if it were left to a public vote. Well, that might or might not have been true when the late Queen Elizabeth was alive. It sure ain't true now. Let's go back to the lines. Trevor in Cambridge is on the line. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Trevor.
Good evening, George. A pleasure to speak to you again. Tonight, I want to speak about Sudan because I don't think what people are realising is Sudan is basically going to be the next Ukraine. We've moved on from Ukraine. Ukraine's going to lose this conflict. It's no longer a use to the Western powers. We're now moving on to Sudan. Now, the interesting part about Sudan is that not many people know that South Sudan gained independence in 2011 with the help of the Americans. Now, so this was separating, or this is your classic divide and conquer rule. So the South has been segregated and given its liberty, and they're basically black African of Sudanese. So the North territories are now controlled by the Arabians. Now, what the Americans have done, they've pitted two generals, the number one and number two, against each other in order to further segregate Sudan, because Sudan has got a bank, a small bank on the Red Sea, where Russia wants to make a port, and they've got organisation between the Sudanese and the Russians to create a port. Now, this is on a strategic waterway. So what you've basically got is the chess players from around the world that are trying to position their armies, their infrastructure, their economies to get the best routes and trade routes possible, and etc. What you've got at the moment in Sudan, which nobody's really talking about, is the fact that the Americans are causing the civil war in Sudan now between two generals that are aligned with each other to fight in Yemen on behalf of Saudi. So this is how aligned these two generals are to the West. So what you've got is the South being segregated in 2011, the North now being separated into two separate fighting factions, and it's all because the West are dominating this region because the Russians want a port on that on the Red Sea. So,
that's not the only reason, Trevor, but it is an important reason. I must contest one or two false dichotomies that I think you made in your otherwise excellent telephone call. First of all, the vast majority of Sudanese are black Africans. Some of them have Arab blood, some of them don't, but all of them speak Arabic, all of them are Africans. It is wrong to fall into the trap of saying that the north of what was once a united Sudan are Arabs and the south are Africans. Most are Arabs, at least if you speak Arabic, you are an Arab. That is what being an Arab is. An Arab is anyone who is an Arabic speaker. It's not anything else. It's not blood or genetics. An Arab is a person whose native tongue, whose mother language is Arabic. And that is all of the people in today's Sudan, some of whom are blacker than others, but almost all of whom are black Africans. So we shouldn't fall into that trap, because that was the trap that was sprung not just to divide Sudan north and south, but east and west. The once Hollywood celebrity cause celebras of Darfur and other conflicts in the west of Sudan were equally falsely posed as conflicts between Africans and Arabs. Israel is busy in Sudan. The United States, as you quite correctly described, is extremely busy. They are extremely opposed to Russia having any kind of military presence on the territory of Sudan, but very much in favor of themselves having as much a presence as possible. The hypocrisy knows no bounds. The two generals that are fighting, you're right. Neither of them is my cup of tea. I have no dog in that fight between these two generals. But the reality is that the United States fomented this civil conflict. Victoria Nuland visited. If Victoria Nuland comes to your country, be ready for civil war. And she did visit, and lo and behold, civil war was the result. I'd only add one point that you did not make. Where's all the Sudan flags on social media? Where are all the special channels at the airports and ports for Sudanese refugees? Are we going to open our hearts and our treasuries to the poor people of Sudan, now spilling out of the country in their hundreds of thousands, soon to be millions, fleeing a civil war? Are they? Are we? You bet we are not. William is in New York. Let's hear from him. William, go ahead.
Good evening, George. Okay, I just wanted to talk about the corporate banksters and the one world government and their allies. I mean, China, Russia, and the U.S. have signed on to the 2030 UN plans for biosecurity, technocracy, central bank digital currency, and continuing vaccinations, and the censorship laws that go with them. And the WEF agrees with the UN in the multipolar world. And George, the Chinese and the Russians have seeded the world with tons of weapons also. I'm not trying to put my country in a good light because there's no way to do that. But freedom fighters or terrorists, they all support the existing power structures. We can't think in the box of propaganda that they offer or will always be playing their game. And Chinese colonization, I mean, talk about Tibet and what's going on in Lahore. Not that I love the Indian government either.
Well, I don't agree with you, but you're more than welcome on the Mother of All Talk shows to expound your own perspective, which I assure you I will not interrupt. But as you have paused, let me intervene. What Chinese colonization? Who is China colonizing? Who is Russia colonizing? Tibet is an ancient part of China. Tibet was ruled by a feudal tyranny which treated the Tibetan people like slaves, as people whose mouth we can stick our tongue, whose bodies and whose minds we could rape and exploit. This Dalai Lama, this old fraud in Gucci shoes, does not represent the best interests of the people of Tibet. Whatever Richard Gere thinks or thought, I don't see the Tibet issue now as quite the cause célèbre that many in Hollywood earlier thought that it was. So Tibet is not being colonized. Tibet is being revolutionized by the Chinese government formed in 1949, when for centuries before that, Tibet was merely a feudal backwater. Now, I always say, and I'm about to say to you, William, before I give you back the floor, you dissed Russia and China, and that's fine. But do say something positive about your solution. If we are not supporting China, if we are not supporting Russia, what should we support? Over to you. Last word to you, William.
I think we should support humanity. Okay, all these false dichotomies, these struggles, whether it's in the Ukraine or in Taiwan, they're all pre-planned. We can't fall victim to any type of propaganda because that path lies death.
I agree.
Okay, we have to.
I agree with that. But what does supporting humanity mean concretely? All sides claim to be supporting humanity. What does it mean concretely in your bag?
Completely? I mean, freedom,
concretely, do it.
Oh,
yeah, go on. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, you're asking for a plan of action. No, George, we have to do what you're doing on your show. We have to keep on talking to each other, okay? And
yeah,
we can't allow ourselves to be... I don't have a master plan yet.
I very much agree with that. I very much agree with that, William. Thank you very much for the call. Don't be shy to make another. Super chats. Joey Moses, hallelujah, sends 99 US cents. Smiling face with sunglasses. Thank you very much, Joey. Torlo Burke, a great supporter of the show, sends €5.99. See, we're across all the currencies. And Darren Arney sends $5 US. Thanks, Mr. Galloway, for all you do. The BRICS must continue to rise. Well, rise and rise they are, Darren. There'll soon be more people in the BRICS than there are in the G20, with far more money and economic power also. Jovan Kudra sends 20 British pounds. Gigi, did you see the disgusting comments by Ursula von der Leyen regarding Israel's 75th Independence Day? Also, no media coverage last week on the main media of the memorial of Jasenovac and what happened in World War II. No comment from Ursula. Well, Ursula could scarcely comment about fascism, but she did comment about Israel, and I addressed it in my monologue on Wednesday's show. Please do look back at it. Mr. Lover, great supporter of the show. We love him. Sends £5. Hippo's character's head pops out of water, surrounded by his hippo squad. And Doc Jazz, a good friend of the show also, every week without fail, sends 50 UAE dirhams. Great guest today, George. April 30 in 1789, George Washington took the oath of office as the first president of the USA. A dark day for the First Nations, with whom, as Palestinians, we sympathise. Thanks, Doc. And Jonathan Wood sends £9.99. Another great show. The recent shows have been so good. Thanks, George and Gayatri. Sorry I've not contributed for a few weeks. Hope this helps. Sure does, Jonathan. And Kyra Moore sends, I told you we were across all currencies. Kyra Moore sends 1,000 Costa Rican colones. Thank you very much, Kyra. Hola from a US expat in Costa Rica. Thank you very much indeed. Colin is in Liverpool, where he's having to suffer the Eurovision Song Contest. Colin, go ahead.
Hi, George. How are you?
All good, by the grace of God, thanks. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, George. Yeah, looking dapper as usual, by the way.
Thank you, mate.
All it is, yeah, brilliant show, by the way. This thing about Ricky Tomlinson, maybe you can explain to your viewers a bit later on who he is, but he's reprising his role in Brookside. And what I've heard is the storyline, obviously, Liverpool are hosting the Eurovision Song Contest. And in the TV show, Brookside, he's supposed to be having lots of Ukrainian flags and bunting all around his house. Now, this is from an ardent socialist. I don't know whether you know Ricky Tomlinson. You might do, George.
I know him. Of course, and I didn't know that. I didn't know any of that. I didn't know Brookside was coming back on television. I'm very glad if it is. It was a wonderful series, and I watched it for many years. Is it coming back?
I did myself. Well, this is what I've read, or this is only on social media. So this is this is what I'm seeing.
Well, it's more likely to be true on social media than it is in the newspapers. But so I didn't know it was coming back. Ricky Tomlinson was a trade union organizer in Brookside Close, set in Liverpool. And it was right that he was a trade union organizer, because before he was an actor, he was not just a trade union organizer, he was sent to prison.
That is correct,
as a trade union organizer. And I'm so old, I was a part of the campaign to get him out of prison, defending the Shrewsbury 2, although there were far more than two who were prosecuted at the time. But I've got to say, Ricky's politics have begun to change. I did see him making very supportive statements about Sir Keir Starmer not that long ago. So it's possible that he has gone politically to change in other ways also. But lastly, Colin, actors are actors. They don't get to choose storylines. They don't get to write the scripts that they speak. And it could be, I'm just positing this as a possibility, that other people have given Ricky this rather difficult role to play as a flag waver of Ukrainian flags. Colin, last word to you.
Okay, thanks for that, George. That's well put, and it probably is the case. But someone, as I say, is an ardent socialist all his life, supporter of the working class and so forth. It just seems a strange.
Well, as you know, Colin. As you know, Colin, ardor can fade. Thanks very much for that wonderful call, and a big hello to all my friends in Liverpool. You were lucky today, 4-3, I must say. Let's take a quick break I'll be right back.
Gosh darn, how do you get this thing to work? Is it that one? Is it this one here? Gosh, was this thing built in America? Jeez. Kamala, would you get in here? I can't get the, gosh darn wireless to work.
You know I can't answer questions, Joe, when I'm laughing.
I'm trying to, listen to that Scottish guy on the wireless, the Galloway fella.
Oh, Joe, you're so funny.
I've been pressing this red button on and off and on and off. Heck, I can't get it to work. Hello, Biden residence.
Mr. President, be advised, we have executed the airstrike on Syria. Confirmed.
That's just great. How long until it gets delivered? I'm starving.
Let's take a call. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. Yeah, I just want to talk about the trans issue that you were speaking about earlier. I've got a book in front of me by Douglas Murray, and he's got a paragraph here I'd just like to read out, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was standing on the corner at a quarter.
All right, I'll get him off. He's a nutter. He's a nutter. In the UK, it's 08081 965 522, and in the US it's +1 844 944 3344.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, my good friend Scouser Lar, a good Everton man, says Brookside isn't returning. Ricky Tomlinson is just doing a cameo role. So let's bring people up to date, perhaps on Wednesday, about whether or not Ricky Tomlinson has turned. Simon is on the line from Fareham and wants to talk about the coronation. Go ahead, Simon.
Hi, George. Nice to talk to you. I have the greatest respect for you and your show. Listening to it every time religiously. Brilliant. Just one thing I wanted to say, and it was basically, you have to cast your mind back a little bit to when Prince Charles invited President Zelensky into his home. I don't really remember it. It wasn't so long ago.
I don't know. I've obliterated that from my mind. I have so many things I'm against Prince Charles for. I probably blotted that out inadvertently. Go on.
Yeah, well, basically, he came to the country. He shook their hands with Rishi Sunak, and then he went to do the same with Prince Charles. And it was at that moment it dawned on me, and I thought, how can I have respect for my king when I know that he is shaking the hands with a man that has NAZ eyes, should I say?
Yeah.
Regiment.
Well,
and this is a guy that.
Yeah. I mean, Simon, he has accompanied and befriended some of the worst scoundrels on the earth. I mean, I don't want to go through all of them, but I mean, this is a man who spent Christmas, who spent holidays with Jimmy Savile, a man guilty of the most heinous crimes. And he did so of his own volition, at his own invitation. So never mind Zelensky, Savile, and many, many others are the rum crew with which King Charles, as we must now apparently call him, has run. Last word to you, Simon.
Well, yeah, I didn't realise all of those things, but I said from Zelensky, who I'd watched videos of him playing the piano with you-know-what, I think that maybe he may have washed his hands after he shook hands with President Zelensky.
Well, I don't know. Charles's hands have been in some rum places, I must tell you. Simon, thank you very much indeed. Terry is in Rainford in Essex. Go ahead, Tel.
Hi, George. It's Rainford near Liverpool, actually, Merseyside.
I beg your pardon. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's okay. A couple of quick things about King Charles. I won't be standing up saying anything. I won't even be watching it. But with regards to Camilla, I agree with what you were saying in your monologue. He gradually sort of done the narrative that, you know, she was queen consort and then so on and so on. And what a lot of people don't realise, she's going to be crowned queen at the same time Charles is going to be crowned. And another thing that you may know is that they've changed the crown for the queen because they don't want the Kohinoor diamond to be in it, which is disputed by India as being stolen, and they want it back. So they've got
although India stole it from Iran.
Doing that. Yes.
India stole it from Iran in the first place, and presumably it was all stolen from Africa.
I didn't know that bit, but yeah.
It's stolen property, that's for sure. No, you're right. And by the way, Terry, I was sitting in Parliament when assurances were required. I remember a Labour MP then, now a Liberal Democrat councillor, Andrew McKinley, who for some reason was a fanatic about this subject, relentlessly questioned government ministers on how we could possibly have, as Queen, somebody who had conducted an adulterous relationship with the next king, whilst both of them were still married, and she could become the queen. And we were repeatedly assured she will not be the queen. She will only be the queen consort. Bad enough, you might think. But now, with the wave of a magic wand, we're supposed to call her the queen. Well, I'll never call her the queen. I had too much respect for the actual queen to call Camilla the queen. Over to you, Terry.
Yeah, I agree with that, George. And what I was going to say as well about your monologue, wasn't Diana's accident very convenient for Charles?
Well, I wouldn't be one of those suggesting that it wasn't an accident, but it definitely was. It cleared the path for what we're seeing now. As I said at the beginning, Terry, I'm against all of them, all royalty. And even if they were wonderful people, blameless and brilliant, I'd still be against this system. But when you've got a guy conducting himself in the sordid way that Charles did, driving his wife mad to the point of total distraction, attempted suicides and the rest, by openly cheating on her from more or less day one of the marriage. What kind of dishonesty is involved in that? And if he's that dishonest, how can he be our head of state? Or is that a requirement to be our head of state, that you be a liar and a cheat? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, it goes back to Edward VIII and Mrs. Simpson. They sort of did exactly the same thing, and then they caused it up to the Nazis for
Indeed.
And they wanted this.
But at least they got drummed out. At least they got drummed out. Mrs. Simpson was never called Queen Simpson, but we're being asked to call Camilla Parker Bowles, as she'll always be to me, the Queen. I won't do it. Terry, thanks for that excellent call. A couple of YouTube comments. Martin Malaga says, as a staunch Iron Lady supporter, that's Mrs. Thatcher for you, I never thought I'd see the day I would be subscribed to the channel and thoroughly entertained by George Galloway. Strange times we live in. Well, my dear friend, as Mrs. Thatcher herself said, it's a funny old world. David is in Los Angeles. Let's hear from him. David, go ahead.
Good day, George. A pleasure to be here with you today.
And you, sir, go on.
If you think that is a scandalous relationship, I challenge you to look at the relationship of our former disgraced mayor, Eric Garcetti. Mr. Garcetti, wow, a strange man indeed. It is known by many people here he's a closeted homosexual, but there's nothing wrong with that. In a high-power relationship with his wife, who is a very high-powered attorney, this man who destroyed the city of Los Angeles, brought tyranny, brought tears, brought unimaginable crimes during his reign, bringing in the COVID measures in Los Angeles during the early parts of the pandemic, has now been named as the ambassador to India, getting rewarded for being in line. I just don't know how somebody so swampy gets rewarded like this as an ambassador to India. I just wanted to get your thoughts, George.
Well, I'm sure that Joe Biden and indeed all American presidents have made all kinds of rum individuals ambassadors. We don't have that system here in Britain. We appoint professional diplomats as ambassadors, but in the United States, these are political appointments. And usually, if you give the winning presidential candidate a lot of money, you stand a chance of being made the ambassador to here or there. I don't know what India has done to deserve this particular man, but I need to make this point. I hope you'll forgive me, David. Nobody at the mother of all talk shows can verify the veracity of anything that you said about the former mayor of Los Angeles, and if you would like to call in, it's free of charge to do so. I've no idea if he is a gay man, and if he is, that's his business. I've no idea if he has a morganatic marriage with his wife, the high-powered attorney, but I beg her to at least accept this explanation from me, that David's call is evidence that we don't vet people's calls and cannot verify any allegations that they make. But if she too would like to call the show, we would be happy to entertain her. I know nothing of the former mayor of Los Angeles and cannot wish him well as the ambassador to India for a variety of reasons, but the most important of which is this: any appointee of Joe Biden is likely to be no friend of mine. Thank you for that. Final few super chats are here now. Rico 611 sends 25 British pounds. Rico, thank you for that. Gigi, keep up the good work. Shame YouTube is restricting your algorithms on the Moats, especially on views, which inevitably affect your revenue. Indeed, it's a known fact that in lieu of complete censorship, these things are done. We have a decent relationship with YouTube. It could be better, but it's much better than that suffered by some of my friends. My good friend Afsan Ratansi and his excellent show, Going Underground, has now been taken off YouTube and must be watched on Rumble alone for the time being. I have no complaint, really, about YouTube, everything in life being relative. My complaints are elsewhere, with Elon Musk at Twitter and with Zuckerberg on Facebook, where I have 750,000 followers, and this show sometimes gets 300 views, which seems unlikely when you have 750,000 followers. Seems to suggest that some kind of suppression, censorship is going on. I'm against censorship, whomsoever practices it, and against whomsoever it is practiced. I believe in letting 1,000 flowers bloom and let the people pick the most fragrant the fragrance that suits them the best. Isn't that what freedom is really about? Isn't that what we were told was freedom? All those decades in which we were told that we lived in a free country with a free market, isn't it? Todd Menzing sends $20. Thank you, Todd. And Elvis, he's back, sends £10. GG, your monologue drove me tears about the history of revisionists we now find ourselves in. Japan, Italy, the Nazis in Ukraine, and above all Germany are now our allies, and we are meant to hate the Russians. And Nick Kilcoyne sends $50. Nick, that's a handsome donation. Thank you very much for it. Roar Axtell, who supports us religiously every week, sends 35 Norwegian crowns. And John Stephen, 10 British pounds. King Charles is a medieval anachronism. Throw him out. Last call is Fadik in Nigeria on China. Don't say we're not a global university of the airways. Fadik, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I really can't explain how I feel talking to you now. I've been a long time listener, but the first time caller, you've been a really, really, really big part of my education, and I just want to thank you very, very much to what you do to people around the world, showing them the true nature of things that we don't see in the mainstream media. You're just a blessing to the world, Mr. Galloway. Thank you very much.
God bless you. Thank you for your extraordinary remarks. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to talk about China and the United States. I've noticed that there are not much callers from Africa. Yeah, so there's this kind of perception that maybe Africa are ignorant to what's going on in the geopolitical arena in the world. But I want to assure listeners around the globe that that's not entirely true. You know, we are very much conscious of what's going on in the world. We know who the good and who the bad guys are. So don't get fooled by our leaders. No, you don't get fooled by our leaders because they are looking out for their pockets. They are looking out for their power. They go with the United States, you know, in terms of UN resolutions and all that. Is because they are afraid of unilateral sanctions, which I think are illegal, by the way, because I don't think there's any legal basis that said one nation can just decide who you cannot trade with this. No, you cannot trade with this. We don't agree with that at all. So don't be fooled by our leaders. They're just scared of sanctions. They want their power. They know that the United States can make their regime hell for them. And as you regularly say, we cannot do anything about the United States, but we can do something about them. You know, we can vote them out. We can go to the street and vote them and force them out. So that's why they go there with the United States. But that's not the general perception of the African people. It's just their lust for power and their lust for fortune. It's just corruption, basically. So, but majority of ordinary Africans are done with the.
Yeah, Fadik, I couldn't have asked for a better final call than that. It was extraordinarily powerful, entirely unexpected, extremely moving for me personally, your earlier remarks, and I thank you very sincerely for them. It's true that we have to grow further in Africa. There are a lot of English-speaking people in Africa, either because of the colonial relationship or through education in English and so on. And it's one of my ambitions as we are going to have a Moats German, as we are going to have a Moats American, that one day we have Moats Africa. It's one of my ambitions. If I don't realize it myself, I pray to God that my children realize it in time. But it is absolutely the case that the peoples of Africa are not only globally conscious, but they have had to be from a history of enslavement, division, colonization, ruthless exploitation, armed struggle for the expulsion of the colonizer, suffering decades of dictatorship whose purpose was to continue colonization by another name in return for being allowed to be the dictator. The interests of the former colonial powers would not be interfered with fundamentally. As I think you've heard me say before, the par example of that is the murder by Britain, Belgium, and the United States of the greatest of all African leaders, Patrice Lumumba. If Lumumba, a young man, the first Prime Minister of Congo, had been allowed to live instead of being murdered, dismembered, and dissolved in acid, his body parts sent to the colonial power Belgium and returned, the final part of them returned only last year, then Lumumba could have been a beacon of hope in Africa, as so many others could have been. The overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah, the tremendous social and political forces that the liberation leaders did and could have gone on to continue to mobilize to truly free the continent of Africa was all stopped dead in its tracks by imperialism and dictatorship. But that is changing now. The African people, conscious of all of that I have just described, know the good guys, as you put it, and know the bad guys. The people of Sudan know the good guys and they know the bad guys. They know who is doing what to whom, for whom. And Africa, like the rest of the world in which so many changes are now underway, will be free one day, will be united one day, will be prosperous one day. On that, I'm certain. Thank you very much for watching. I apologize for overshooting my time by all of 3 minutes, but that last caller reached me and made me say what I had to say. But I'll be back on Wednesday at the slightly later time of 9 p.m. UK time. Please note the time difference. 9 p.m. on Wednesday for the midweek mother of all talk shows. I hope you'll be there, and I hope you'll bring another viewer with you. Until then, good night and good luck.